Learners will be able to identify the members of the IEP team, describe the steps of the IEP process, and list the parts of an IEP and an IFSP. IDEA requires that a multi-professional team of professionals be part of the special education process. In most states, this is referred to as the IEP team. The IEP team requires the participation of the child's general education teacher, a special education teacher, a school administrator or other designee, a parent or parents, a school psychologist, related service professionals, and as appropriate given the student's age, the student. Other possible school professionals might include a school social worker, a guidance counselor, or an educational diagnostician. Other family members, an advocate or lawyer, or a parent surrogate may also attend IEP meetings. This figure illustrates the IEP process, the process by which a student becomes identified as having an educational classification that makes them eligible for special education or related services. First, the student is in a general education classroom. Someone recognizes the potential problem. The problem could be academic or related to social and emotional or other areas of functioning. A child's educational or school records are reviewed, and oftentimes a classroom observation is conducted. Pre-referral interventions is an important component of the IEP process. Pre-referral interventions are interventions that are put in place within the context of the general education classroom environment. These interventions may address a specific academic component or a specific behavior or social emotional need. The goal is to determine if these interventions can provide sufficient support to address the problem identified earlier. If the pre-referral interventions are successful, then no formal referral is completed. If the pre-referral interventions were not successful, the IEP team would request permission from the parent or guardian to evaluate the student. If parental consent is obtained, then the evaluation is completed. If parental consent is not granted, the student would remain in their present placement, and the school may request a due process hearing. The evaluation consists of a non-discriminatory assessment battery. The assessments are completed by members of the multidisciplinary team, or the IEP team. Input is provided from parents. Assessments of a student's academic achievement, cognitive functioning, social and emotional functioning, oral language abilities, fine and gross motor skills, and other assessments necessary to plan for the student are included in the non-discriminatory assessment battery. After the assessments are completed, the IEP team meets to share the results. The results of the assessments are shared and interpreted. Based on these results, the IEP team makes a determination of whether or not the student is eligible for special education services. As part of this determination, the specific educational classification is also determined. If the student is found eligible, the IEP team identifies that special education services are necessary. If the student is found ineligible, the student remains in their present classroom setting. They do not receive special education services, but the IEP team can consider if the student is eligible for a Section 504 accommodation plan. If a student is determined to be eligible for special education services, the IEP team, including the parent, identify the appropriate goals and objectives for the student's individualized education plan, or IEP. The IEP team also determines the least restrictive and most appropriate placement for the delivery of special education and related services. If the parent agrees with the goals and objectives, they give written consent or permission, and the services begin. If the parent disagrees with either the content of the IEP with respect to goals and objectives or the recommended placement, due process is available. Special education services are to be implemented as soon as possible following parent permission. IEPs are reviewed annually. IEPs can also be revised as needed. Every 3 years, a triennial evaluation is conducted. This determines if the student still meets the criteria for the educational classification and continues to be eligible to receive special education and related services. Students can also be dismissed from special education at any point after the initial IEP. IDEA identifies the components required of IEPs. However, each state can decide how to structure and format the IEP document. IEPs must first include information about the student's present level of educational performance. This includes information about their current academic performance and can also include data about their oral language performance, fine and gross motor, and social emotional functioning. An important component of the present level of educational performance section of the IEP is a description of how the disability and the student's needs affect their performance in the general education curriculum. The second component of the IEP are measurable annual goals that are linked to supporting students' access of the general education curriculum. States may choose to include objectives for the annual goals or benchmarks for the annual goals. The third component of the IEP is how and when progress towards meeting annual goals will be measured and reported. The IEP also includes information describing the special education and related services that the student will receive. This includes the type and duration of services. For example, how many minutes of reading instruction per week. This section may also include supplementary aids and services that would be provided to the student. The IEP includes information about the student's placement in the least restrictive environment and their participation in activities with non-disabled peers. It includes information about students' participation in state and district testing and any adaptations that may be necessary. For students ages 14 and above, it also includes transition planning. Finally, the IEP includes important dates, such as the next annual review and the next triennial review. For infants and toddlers, the document that is used as part of this process is called an Individualized Family Service Plan, or an IFSP. An IFSP is similar to an IEP, except the goals include family components. Some goals may be written for this child, but some goals are written for the parent, especially with respect to parent training. The placement and the setting in IFSPs is often the natural setting for a child of that age. That might be the student's home, daycare, or a preschool setting. An additional member of the multidisciplinary team for infants and toddlers is an early childhood special education teacher or an early interventionist.